name's Vicky Hawkins, I'm from In the Snug and I'm a textile artist. I make limited edition wall art, furnishings, gifts. As part of that, I also make personalised bunting with mottos and messages. In association with BBC Radio Northampton Crafternoons, I am going to be showing you today how to make your own easy sew bunting. It's nice and straightforward and fun to make, so let's get started. Each pennant on the bunting garland is a triangle, and in order to cut these out in a nice uniform way, we'll first of all need a pattern. If you've already downloaded yours from the Crafternoon sessions and printed it out, you'll have it in 2 pieces, so it's time to get cutting. Take a pair of scissors that you don't mind being used on paper, not your best fabric scissors, and let's cut this out. Once you've done that, you can discard the rest of your pattern, and taking your sticky tape, you now need to piece these 2 pieces together. So you match up the lines and the point, take your tape, and piece these together accurately. And there you have it, your triangle piece ready to use. So next you want to take your fabric, lay it out flat on the table. You want to make sure you've ironed any creases out, because otherwise they'll affect the shape of your triangles ultimately. And then take your triangle pattern piece and you're going to pin it to the fabric. You want to line it up with any pattern that you've got there, and to make sure that if it's a directional pattern, that your pattern is going to be the right way round when it's hanging on the flag, so making sure that the lowest point of your flag and any pattern is moving in this direction. So let's just all you need is 3 pins, just to pin it out to the corners to make sure that the corners stay in place when you're cutting the fabric. And 1 last pin, and then we're going to be using pinking shears in order to be cutting this out. If you can see at the edge of this fabric here, you can see there's some frayed edges. This has been cut with normal scissors, so if you cut your scissors out with normal just fabric scissors, the chances are it will continue to fray like this, and that will give you quite an untidy look. So it's best if you can do it with pinking shears. Pinking shears have teeth like these that will give you a triangulated effect to the edge of your triangle, and it will just stop any fraying. So we'll get cutting. And then you can take your pins out, keeping your project to the right hand side of your scissors just helps keep your project flat to the table, and also just make it as easy as possible. So keep turning your project as you cut out, like I did just then, and then you can take out your paper pattern, and there's your first triangle. So the first part of the tutorial is for version 1 bunting that I'm going to be showing you today. This is ideal if you're making lengths and lengths of it, if you're wanting to hang it outside. It's also great if you're wanting just an easy, straightforward project to get your teeth stuck into and for a very quick result. So once you've got your triangle cut out with the pinked edges, you can then see that these edges don't fray, so that's going to last longer than if you just use normal scissors. And what you want to do is repeat that step for as many triangles as you need for your project. So think about if you're wanting to put any lettering on there, if you're wanting to write a motto or a message, think about how many spaces you'll need, or just about the general length. Remember, this is a 23cm pattern that we're using, so you can multiply that up and think about the spacing that you'd want within your bunting to decide how much you'll need. I'm using cottons today. They're nice and easy to sew with. They're thin enough to dry if they do withstand a shower, if they're hanging outside, but also they're stable enough to make a nice bunting. I'd recommend using a woven fabric rather than something stretchy and knit. They won't hold their shape as nicely. But if you did want to play around with textures and just break it up, then denim works really well. So if you've got some old jeans or an old jacket that you're wanting to upcycle, then that would work really well. Something along the lines of cord or a heavier fabric, that would work great as well. And do play around with colour as well. Bunting doesn't have to be uniform in terms of the colourways that you use. In fact, very often a mix of textures, patterns, colours looks really, really effective. So be as creative as you like. So I've now cut out all 8 triangles. I've decided to make mine 8 flags long. They're 23 centimetres a flag, so with about 25 centimetres at either end, so you've got a good distance to hang and loop. That will make about 2 meters 30 or so of bunting, so that's a good length. But you can adjust your flag sizes. You can adjust the gap in between your flag sizes. If you're looking to make lots of it, you don't want your flags all touching because you'll need lots and lots of flags to be able to cover a long distance. So I'd recommend probably half the distance of a flag between flags if you're going to make something that's really big. But if you've got a message on there, then you're going to want to keep your flags nice and close together, so the message reads clearly. So now I've got my 8 flags and I know what they measure. Well, they measure the same along each side, so it doesn't really matter as long as your pattern is up the right way. I've multiplied that up and I will now cut my bias binding to the right length. So for those of you that don't know what bias binding is, it's a pre-cut and pre-ironed tape, and if I just open it out, you can see that it's had 2 folds. Sorry, the light's catching it on the wrong direction there. So, and what we're going to do is we're going to be folding this in half and using it to bind the tops of our flag. So we're going to be putting the flag top in here and stitching over the top of it to hold those flags nice and straight and give it a nice neat edge. This is a great scrap busting project. You don't need to have the same coloured fabrics, you don't need to have the same texture fabrics, as I said earlier. I've gone for a selection, it's really nice and sunny here today, so I've gone for a selection of kind of English garden pinks, and I've put some plains in there as well, but really broken up with some different patterns. That's what I had in stock today, so it doesn't have to be based on a theme at all. It works really well with having bold patterns at the back and plain lettering if you want to do lettering, or equally the other way around, having all plain flags and then the lettering in colours. For instance, if you wanted to do your lettering all in the colours of the rainbow, that would look really nice, so a letter per colour of the rainbow on just a plain backing like this. Right, so we'll move on. So for version 1 of the bunting, you don't need any special equipment, just a needle and thread. And the needle I've got here is just a standard, quite a fine, sharp pointed needle. Don't use anything too thick, not an embroidery needle or anything. Although they might be easier to thread, you won't get such a nice finish, and actually it'd be very hard to sew with. I am going to be using blue thread today because hopefully that will read really well on, you'll be able to see it. I'd normally though be matching my thread with my binding tape, so I'd be using white here, or matching with whichever colour that I've got, or ribbon, or whatever I'm using. You can use contrasting colours and they can look really nice, but depending on how confident you are with your hand sewing, you might want to practice first with the colour that is neutral and blends in, because contrasting stitches obviously show up a bit more. So if you look online, you'll see loads of ways to thread a needle. I'm not going to show you anything nifty here today, I'm afraid, other than putting the thread through the eye of the needle. And if we can do this first time, it will be some sort of, I don't know, some sort of haberdashery miracle. There we go. And again, making knots There are loads of different ways to do this online, but the way I do it is I wrap the thread between my thumb and my forefinger around, then I roll my thumb across my finger and pull the knot down, and then you've got a knot at the end of your thread. Okay, and then you're going to take your project. I'm right-handed, so bear with me if you're not, I'm sorry, but hopefully you'll be able to translate this over enough. So I folded my tape in half, so if you can see that there's a V there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the needle about 1 centimetre in and inside that V and out on the front of my project. So if you pull it all the way through, and you can now see that the knot isn't visible in the back, and I've got the thread coming out of the front of my project there. So and then I'm going to I've started about 2 or 3 millimeters up from the open edge of my project here, and I'm now going to be making my first stitch. So this needs to be less than ½ centimetre really, about 3 or 4 millimeters. So I'm doing that by passing my needle. I'm sorry, the light's not very good. Let me see if I can just change. I think that might be a bit better, mightn't it? So I'm doing that by passing my needle back through the front of my project and pulling it back out the other side, and you can now see that I've got that first stitch there. And then I want to come back up from the back of my project, back up to the front of my project in a straight line as possible, and about ½ centimetre away again from my, well, just shy of, sorry, ½ centimetre again than my first stitch. So if you can see, there's my first stitch completed, I'm in a straight line, and there's my needle coming back out on the front of my project. Okay, and then to complete my back stitch, I'm going to go back in to where my last stitch completed, just here. So I'll try and do this as visibly as I can. So back in through there, pull out the back of your project, and now you've got 2 stitches. That's the first part of your back stitch. Okay, so on the back of your project you've got your needle and thread, and you're going to come back out on the front of your project again in a nice straight line, and about 4 millimeters, 3 or 4 millimeters away again from the back of your last stitch. Okay, and pull it through to the front, and then you're going to go back in to your last stitch here. Here we go, and pull it back through, and now you've got 3 stitches. Okay, hopefully everyone can see those. I know it's not incredibly clear. I might try and do you a close-up in a moment as well, so you can see. As you get a bit more confident, as you come back up through about 3 or 4 millimeters away from the last stitch, I'll have to complete a stitch, I'm thinking now, yeah, and back in on yourself again, so back in here. Instead of pulling the needle all the way through, you can just scoop now that 3 or 4 millimeters there and pull your needle through. Okay, and then back in here, and don't pull your needle all the way through, just go along 3 or 4 millimeters from that thread. Try and hold it here if you can see it better, and scoop, and there we go, we've got another stitch there as well. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is practice your back stitching all the way along your bunting tape, all the way along here, and then making sure that you've got your sandwich of flag along here, and keep going, and then you're going to pin your next flag here and keep sewing, and so forth until you've hand sewn in all of your flags. Okay, so I'm going to get sewing. So once you've stitched all of your bunting together, you'll have something that looks like this. So I've kept my flags nice and close together on this because I'm actually going to add some lettering in a moment. But what you'll notice is that I've double checked as I've gone along, and that I've got the right side, so the pattern side of the fabric, all along the front here, not including obviously the blanks, because this isn't double-sided, so you do have the backs of the print here, which, you know, is fine, but it's not as vivid. So you want to make sure that you've got all the nice right side of your fabric on the same side. And as I said, we've got about 25 centimetres here. So as a last step, just so you've got somewhere to hang this, I just fold 5 centimetres or so over like this, so you've got a bit of a loop, and just use that same back stitch that we talked about to stitch a line here, and then you'll have a nice neat loop at either end that you can then attach and hang your binding by. So that's the easy version of the bunting. I'm going to show you now how to add some lettering to that. So here I've got some adhesive iron-on paper. So on one side, you're not going to be able to see that very well, but there's an exposed glue that you can, it's very smooth, it's not sticky yet, you can just run your finger over. And on the other side, it's like a tracing paper. Okay, so when you work with this, you just want to make sure that you're working in reverse, because what you're going to do is iron that exposed side down onto the wrong side of your fabric, so the side without any pattern, and then you'll cut out your shapes. And so what you don't want to do is work in the right way round to you now, and then when you cut out your shapes, they'll be the wrong way round for your bunting. So I'm just going to show you what to do with this. So as part of the downloadable templates, you'll find a whole alphabet in reverse. So just print off the letters you need for the phrase that you'd like. I'm going to be writing together on my bunting. So I'm going to start with the letter T. So using my template, I'm then going to take my, so this adhesive, iron-on adhesive can be called a number of things. It can be called heat and bond, it can be called Bond-A-Web. You'll find it in craft shops, online, lots of sewing shops sell it as well. So you want to take that and take the exposed side facing down, and I'm quite thrifty where I can be with this, so I'm just going to turn this light off so hopefully you can see a little bit better. There we go, hopefully you see what I'm doing. And so I like to butt it up as close as I can to the edge, and I take a pencil and I'm just going to trace around the shape of the letter here. So if you were doing your whole word, it doesn't make for great video here, so I'm not going to do the whole word here, but you could put your whole word here, okay, and iron it onto one piece of fabric, because again, it means that any pattern that you've got on the fabric will keep it nice and uniform across all the letters. You can be quite thrifty that way, as I say, because you're not cutting out individual letters, and yeah, it just keeps it nice and straightforward as well. Doing anything in batches when it comes to sewing really helps. So if you've got a job, so pinning all at once or sewing all at once, cutting all at once, really makes it much easier. So I've just got my iron on in the background heating up, and as I said, for the purposes of this video, I've just done one letter at a time. So I've got my T here, and I've got my fabric here. I'm actually just using calico, so this is really cheap fabric. It's unbleached, so you've got like the natural grain to it there, but it has a really nice sort of vintage feel to it, quite a craft feel to it. It's something you might see or might associate with going to a festival or something like that, so this is great for this kind of project, and nice and cheap, as I say. So mine actually doesn't have a right and wrong side, but if this did have a pattern, I would be putting the pattern side down on the table now, and then I would be putting my letter with the exposed shiny side down on top of that, and then taking that over to my iron and keeping it nice and flat and still. And then take the iron and you place it over there and you hold it on for about 5 to 10 seconds. I'd say 15 at most. What you want to do is kind of use the pressure of the iron rather than rubbing too hard, because if you start rubbing, you might start rubbing creases in, or you might shift your lettering over the pattern or something like that. So just leave it for a couple of seconds to cool, because it will be hot, and then you can bring it back over to your working space. So now you can see that that's attached, that letter T is attached to this piece of fabric. Okay, so I'm just going to cut round this shape. As I said, if you're writing a whole word, I'd suggest writing the whole word on your Wonderweb to start with. So you do it on the tracing paper type side, and then you can adhere the whole word, and remember it will be backwards, to the wrong side of your fabric, so the side without the pattern on, and then you can just cut all of your letters out at once. Okay, so we're just working down to the last bit of the T here, and then we'll be done. And so now, if you see on this side, it just looks like a fabric tee, but as you can see, it's quite stable. It's got quite a lot of integrity to it, so that will make it stand out nicely on your bunting, but also that can now be stuck onto your bunting flag with no further sewing at all. If you want to sew round the edges, you can. It gives it a bit of definition, especially if you do it in a contrasting colour like black. You can still use that same backstitch to get the results you want. It also gives it a handmade feel, so rather than just looking stuck on and crafted, it looks like it's been sewn as well. But trying to pin that onto your fabric now and trying to take that to your sewing machine or trying to hand sew it would be really quite tricky. So again, even if I was sewing over the top of this letter, I would still be adhering it to the fabric first and then sewing over the top. So I'm going to take my first bunting flag and we're going to take this back to the ironing board. So when I said earlier about making sure your flags are in the right order as you sew them on, because I'm right-handed, I was working from right to left on my binding, and so the end of the word would have to be the first flag I stitched as I stitched in that direction. That would be under the assumption that you'd already ironed on your letters onto the flags. But if you've just got this single sided bunting that we're doing here, the quick stuff to just whiz up, then actually you can iron on your letters afterwards, so it's really not such a big deal then as to how you put your letters, how you sew your flags on to start with. So what I'm going to do is, off the back of this T, I'm going to peel the backing paper. So as you can see, that just peels away, and that now reveals another smooth side, which is the glue again, but it's not sticky again because we haven't activated it with the heat. So fabric side up and glue side down, I'm going to position this on the front of my bunting flag, so where I want it to be seen. So I've gone very central, but remember, this doesn't have to be exact. Your hand stitching, nobody's going to get up that close to your bunting to scrutinise your hand stitching or to see if your T is exactly the same distance from the bunting tape as your O. Just enjoy doing it. It's supposed to be an enjoyable task. So now that's positioned, I'm going to take my iron again, and I'm just going to hold it over the top of there again for another 10 seconds or so. Again, remembering to use the weight of the iron, and you can give it a little rock backwards and forwards, but don't give it a hard iron as if you were ironing a shirt or something like that. All of the cottons that I'm using are 100% cotton, so they'll take quite high heat, so I've got my iron on steam, and so again, just leave it to cool for a second because you have got your iron on the hottest setting, but as soon as that's cooled down, you can now see that I've got my first letter on the bunting there, so that will be the T of the together. So I'm going to carry on now and add all of the other letters to my bunting. And now I've ironed on all of my lettering, I've got my completed bunting. I've actually done a black outline stitch, just a real sketchy stitch on my sewing machine, just to give it a bit of high definition here so it can be seen from afar. But also I just really like the style at the moment. But this bunting, this together bunting, is now ready to be hung. So if you've been following along, well done, you've completed your bunting. I hope that you've enjoyed it. And I'm going to go on to show you version 2 now, which is double-sided bunting with a closed edge, so without the pinking sheer edges, so nice and neat, really smart. And if you're looking to send a particular message or looking to give it as a gift or so on, it's a really nice way of finishing your bunting. Okay.